"They're not going to listen," he said to the woman adjusting his microphone. "They never do. Not really." She paused, hand still near the mic stand, and looked at him directly. "Then speak anyway," she said. "The ones who need it will hear every word." His name was Stellan Cord, 33 years old. He had been writing poetry since he was 19, filling composition notebooks with careful, unhurried lines about ordinary things. Parking lots at dusk, the particular quiet of a hospital waiting room, the way grief sits in the body like a stone that shifts, but never fully leaves. He had been in a wheelchair for 6 years, after a spinal injury that arrived without warning and rearranged everything. Not just his body, his sense of where he belonged in a room. Tonight, he belonged at the Harlow Arts Center, a mid-sized venue in Portland that hosted its annual community reading every October. Folding chairs, fluorescent warmth softened by string lights someone had hung along the back wall. Maybe 90 people, most of them there for someone else. Stellan had not been asked to headline. He was third on a list of 7 readers. He had one poem prepared. He had read it to himself so many times that the words had gone smooth and quiet inside him, the way a river stone goes smooth. He wasn't nervous exactly. He was something older than nervous. He was tired of wondering whether the words were enough. In the 4th row, almost exactly center, sat Waverly Holt, 28. She had arrived late, slipping into an aisle seat with her coat still half on, a small notebook pressed under one arm. She ran Holt and Meridian, an independent publishing house she had built from a single-room office and a belief that literature should reach people who didn't always see themselves in bookstore windows. She had come tonight because her junior editor had mentioned the reading, and Waverly had learned years ago to follow small recommendations carefully. She had not come for any particular reader. She had not heard of Stellan Cord. When his name was called, there was polite, distracted applause. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone near the back was still typing on a phone. Stellan wheeled to the front slowly, adjusted so the mic height worked for him, set his printed page on his knee, and looked out at the room for a long moment without speaking. That moment of silence was the first thing that made Waverly look up from her notebook. Then he began. The poem was called Load-Bearing. It was about his father, a man who had worked 30 years in a warehouse and come home every evening with the particular silence of someone who has spent all his words on staying upright. It was about what it meant to be held up by something invisible. It was about the wheelchair, eventually, but not in the way people expected, not as a symbol of limitation, but as the thing that had taught him, finally, to stop pretending he didn't need anything from anyone. The room went quiet in stages. First the back rows, then the middle. Then even the person with the phone set it face down on their knee. Waverly stopped writing. When Stellan finished, there was a pause, the kind that happens when an audience needs a moment to return to themselves. Then the applause began, and it was different from the kind that had greeted him. It was the kind that comes from somewhere lower in the chest. Waverly was on her feet before she had consciously decided to stand. She was not the only one, but she was the first. Stellan looked out at the room from his chair, and the expression on his face was not triumph, something that looked, from a distance, like relief. After the reading, Waverly found him near the side table, where readers were gathering with cups of lukewarm tea. She introduced herself simply, first name only, no title, and told him the poem had moved her. Not in the language of a publisher assessing work. In the plain language of someone who had been reached. "The part about your father," she said. "The silence that costs something. I know that silence." Stellan looked at her for a moment. "Most people comment on the wheelchair part," he said. "The ending. The ending lands because of everything before it," she said. He was quiet. Then, "That might be the most useful thing anyone has said to me about that poem." They talked for 40 minutes beside that side table, tea going cold between them. She asked about his other work carefully, without pressure, The way you ask about something you already sense is significant. He told her about the notebooks, 3 of them, filled. A 4th he hadn't started, because he wasn't sure what came next. What he didn't tell her, what he hadn't told anyone, was that he had nearly withdrawn from tonight's reading twice. That the exhaustion of wondering whether his voice had a place in rooms like this had become, lately, heavier than the work itself. That load-bearing was the last poem he had completed in 8 months. Waverly gave him her card before she left. No pitch, no promises. Just, if you ever want someone to read the notebooks, I'd consider it a privilege. He held the card for a long time after she walked away. 6 weeks later, after an email exchange that moved slowly and honestly, Stellan sent her the first notebook. Just the first, with a note that said he wasn't ready to call it anything yet. She read it over a single weekend and called him Monday morning, not to offer a contract, but to tell him that page 31 had made her sit very still for a long time, and she wanted him to know that. The collection was published 14 months later. It was called Load-Bearing. It found readers in places neither of them had predicted. Physical therapists who kept copies in waiting rooms. Teachers who assigned single poems to students who had stopped reading. A woman in her 60s who wrote to the publisher to say she had read page 47 to her brother in a hospice bed and that he had squeezed her hand. On the night of the launch reading, held back at the Harlow Arts Center, Waverly sat in the 4th row again. Same seat. Stellan noticed from the front of the room. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't need to. He looked out at a full house. Every seat taken, people standing along the walls, and felt something he hadn't felt in that long, heavy year of silence. He felt like the words had always been worth it. He had just needed someone to stop and really listen. When the reading ended and the room rose, Waverly stood with them. Stellan looked out at the crowd, then found her face among them, and offered the smallest nod. She returned it. Afterward, she found him by the same side table, same lukewarm tea. The whole evening impossibly rhyming with the one before. "You told me to speak anyway," he said, "that night, before I went up. That was you." She smiled. "I said the ones who needed it would hear." He looked at her. "Did you know you were one of them?" She was quiet for a moment. Then honestly, "No, but I'm glad I was in the room." Kindness doesn't always arrive with explanation. Sometimes it's a stranger who stands first, when everyone else is still deciding. Sometimes it's the willingness to listen, truly listen, before offering anything at all. And sometimes that single act of genuine attention is enough to give a quiet voice the courage to keep speaking. The world needs the words that almost went unwritten, and the people who make space for them matter more than they will ever know. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.